What happens when a young jerk tries to intimidate an elderly veteran? You won't believe who shows up in his defense. The worn steps of the Ashwood Place subway station, a familiar landmark on Brooklyn's D line, groaned beneath Eugene Salloway's deliberate weight. The morning air, thick with the scent of damp concrete and the distant sugary promise of Goldman's Bakery, held a coolness that spoke of an early autumn. Eugene, his shoulders slightly stooped by the passage of 9 decades, clutched a small paper bag. Inside, 2 maple-glazed donuts, a small gesture of appreciation for Leroy, the young conductor whose smile always brightened the subterranean gloom and who consistently offered a helping hand with the collapsible wheelchair. That chair, however, wasn't for Eugene himself. It was for Captain Blackwood, his old friend, currently confined to his bed after a nasty fall. Eugene had promised to bring the captain a fresh stack of naval history texts from the Bryant Park Public Library, and those books, nestled securely in the folded chair, represented a lifeline for a man who lived for the printed page. Eugene cut a distinctive figure. His faded Brooklyn Dodgers baseball cap, softened by countless washes, barely concealed the thinning silver hair beneath. His denim jacket, a comfortable second skin, bore the subtle yet unmistakable pin of a World War II veteran, its brass dulled by time and the elements. His sturdy canvas trousers, practical and unpretentious, spoke of a life lived without frills. Each movement he made was measured, unhurried, a testament to a lifetime of discipline and quiet resilience. His eyes, deeply set within a web of fine wrinkles, held a profound wisdom, tinged with a melancholy that lingered from battles fought and loves lost. Since his dear Edith had passed a few years prior, his days had taken on a quiet, almost meditative rhythm, punctuated by these trips into the city. The subway, with its predictable rumble and a fleeting connection to the vibrant world above, offered him a sense of purpose, a small anchor in the vast ocean of his solitude. The platform was already a canvas of morning activity. Students, backpacks slung low, a kaleidoscope of youth heading to NYU, office workers clutching thermoses of lukewarm coffee, their faces already etched with the day's demands, and a handful of wide-eyed tourists engrossed in their foldable maps. Amidst this familiar tableau, a discordant note emerged. A knot of teenagers, perhaps 16 or 17, their loose hoodies and strategically ripped jeans announcing their generational allegiance. Their laughter, sharp and unapologetic, echoed off the tiled walls, a jarring intrusion into the station's usual hum. One of the boys, a lanky youth with sun-streaked, almost straw-like hair and a perpetual smirk he clearly believed was charming, caught sight of Eugene. This was Xavier Flynn, a self-appointed king of the school hallways at Colson High, known for his relentless needling of anyone he perceived as vulnerable. His cronies, Blake Harper and Chance Stiller, mirrored his swagger, their expressions a testament to their shared, misguided confidence. The girls, Chloe Burns and Sophia Reynolds, giggled on cue, their desperate attempts to impress Xavier palpable. As Eugene approached the platform's edge, patiently awaiting the approaching train, Xavier nudged Blake with his elbow. "Yo, check out Grandpa," he muttered, feigning to adjust his hood. "Looks like he forgot shopping carts stay at the supermarket." Chance snickered, a low, guttural sound. "Maybe he's off to war with it. That badge on his jacket, probably from the Civil War." Their laughter swelled, drawing the attention of a few other commuters. Eugene heard their dismissive remarks, each word a tiny pinprick, but he remained outwardly calm, his gaze fixed on the gleaming tracks. Confrontation held no appeal for him. He had weathered far too many storms to waste energy on such trivial provocations. In his youth, as a fresh-faced lieutenant facing the brutal realities of the Pacific Theater, such insolence would have been met with a swift, decisive response. But those days were long gone, replaced by a quiet dignity that was, in its own way, far more potent. The train, an old rumbling beast of steel, finally emerged from the tunnel's maw, its headlights piercing the gloom. With a screech of tortured metal, it shuddered to a halt, its doors hissing open to disgorge a wave of passengers before swallowing a new one. Eugene carefully maneuvered his wheelchair toward the open doors, mindful of the ebb and flow of the crowd. Just as he was about to step inside, Xavier, positioned deceptively close, extended his leg with a sudden, deliberate jerk. It was a swift, unexpected move, and Eugene stumbled over it. The paper bag, his small offering of goodwill, slipped from his grasp. The 2 maple donuts tumbled onto the grimy floor of the subway car, one of them instantly flattened beneath an unforgiving boot. "Whoops, my bad, Grandpa. My foot just kind of slipped out," Xavier drawled, feigning innocence, but his eyes danced with a cruel glee. His friends erupted in a fresh wave of cackles. Chloe even clapped a hand over her mouth, a transparent attempt to conceal her snickers. Eugene straightened, his face a mask of impassivity. Yet a fleeting spark of anger flickered deep within his eyes. It was not for the lost donuts, insignificant in themselves, but for the sheer, senseless cruelty, the gratuitous act of malice directed at an unsuspecting soul. He looked at Xavier, then slowly lowered his gaze to the ruined pastries. He knelt with a measured slowness, carefully gathering the remnants of the bag, avoiding the sticky, smeared pastry. "What a shame," Blake commented, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Now Grandpa won't get his breakfast." "Maybe he shouldn't be eating sweets anyway. Sugar's bad for old bones," Chance added, sparking another round of gleeful laughter. The train doors began their slow, inexorable closing. Several passengers who had witnessed the petty cruelty unfold subtly averted their gazes, their faces impassive. In this modern world, few dared to intervene in another's quarrel, especially when confronted with a group of boisterous, unpredictable teenagers. Eugene stepped fully into the car, positioning the folded wheelchair against the wall, clearing the aisle. His eyes, devoid of fear or outrage, met Xavier's once more. This time, Eugene did not look away. He simply held the gaze, and in his eyes, there was not the fury Xavier might have expected, but a profound, almost cosmic calm, a stillness that was far more unnerving than any outburst. Xavier felt a prickle of unease under that unwavering stare. Usually, his victims either cowered or lashed out, but this old man was different. He tried to mask his discomfort, nudging Blake again. "Whatever, man. He's just some old weirdo." The train lurched forward, gaining speed, the rhythmic clatter of its wheels a dull roar that swallowed the remaining snippets of conversation. Eugene stood by the wall, one hand resting lightly on the wheelchair, his eyes closed. He seemed to have retreated into himself, perhaps seeking refuge from the persistent noise and the unsettling encounter. The group of teenagers continued their boisterous chatter, their voices peppered with slang and punctuated by bursts of laughter. Xavier, desperate to reassert his dominance, launched into a loud, embellished tale of how he had outsmarted a teacher, periodically glancing at Eugene, hoping to elicit some reaction. But the old man remained utterly still. At the next stop, Greenwood Avenue, new passengers streamed into the car, among them an elderly gentleman with a cane and a young woman juggling 2 small children. Eugene, without opening his eyes, subtly gestured for the woman to place her stroller beside his wheelchair, silently offering her a sliver of much-needed space. She offered him a grateful, if somewhat surprised, smile and a quiet nod. Xavier, witnessing this small act of kindness, decided it was time for another performance. He pulled out his phone, its screen glowing brightly in the dimness of the car, and began recording Eugene, clearly intending to post the footage online. "Look, people," he announced into the camera, feigning a conspiratorial whisper, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "Grandpa here, the wheelchair-pushing invalid. He probably thinks he's doing a good deed, but really he's just getting in everyone's way." His friend snickered again. Chloe and Sophia leaned closer, eager to be included in the frame. Maybe he has Alzheimer's? Chloe added, feigning a concerned frown. Someone should probably help him get home before he gets lost. Eugene's eyes slowly opened. His gaze swept over them, pausing briefly on Xavier's phone. He uttered not a single word. He simply looked, and that silent gaze was more potent than any shout or threat. In his eyes, there was such an profound weariness of human folly that even Xavier, for a fleeting moment, faltered. "What are you staring at, old man?" Xavier snarled, attempting to mask his sudden insecurity. "Looking for some internet fame? I can make you famous, if you want." Eugene slowly, deliberately, shook his head. He spoke no words, but his simple gesture was imbued with such a profound disdain that it stung Xavier far more deeply than any verbal insult could have. "What do you think you're doing, old geezer?" Xavier's voice rose, attracting the attention of the other passengers. He stepped closer to Eugene, clearly intent on provoking a reaction. "Looks like you forgot who's in charge here. This ain't your old veterans club." He took another step forward, his hand reaching for the veteran's pin on Eugene's jacket. But before his fingers could even brush the fabric, the old man, with an unexpected swiftness that belied his age, seized Xavier's wrist. His grip was surprisingly firm, like steel, and Eugene's eyes, usually so placid, now burned with an icy fire. "Do not touch that," Eugene murmured, his voice, usually so calm, now imbued with a barely contained power. Xavier tried to pull away, but Eugene's grip was unyielding. Suddenly, all his bravado evaporated. Standing before him was not merely an old man, but something far more formidable. "Let go of me, you old bastard!" Xavier shrieked, his voice laced with panic. The tension in the subway car escalated to a palpable degree. All eyes were fixed on the two figures. Passengers held their breath, anticipating what would happen next. The woman with children clutched them closer, her eyes wide with apprehension. Eugene released Xavier's wrist as abruptly as he had seized it. Xavier stumbled backward, rubbing his reddened skin. His face was ashen. He looked at Eugene with unmistakable fear. You broke my arm," Xavier whined, though it was clear his claim was an exaggeration. Eugene merely offered a fleeting, bitter smile. He closed his eyes again, as if to signal that the unfortunate spectacle was concluded. Xavier, humiliated and visibly shaken, retreated to his friends. "He's just some crazy old man," he muttered, attempting to salvage some semblance of his former swagger. But his voice trembled, and his friends, for their part, noticed. The train continued its journey, plunging deeper into the tunnel's darkness. The palpable tension in the car slowly dissipated, but a lingering apprehension remained. It seemed as though everyone awaited something more. You won't believe who stepped in to help him. This is just the beginning. It's going to get much more intense. Dans the air in the subway car remained thick with an unsettling quiet, a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of a New York morning commute. Xavier and his clique, their bravado shattered by Eugene's unexpected strength, huddled together, their whispers barely audible above the train's rhythmic clatter. Xavier, in a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of cool, compulsively scrolled through his phone, avoiding Eugene's silent gaze. Blake and Chance kept a cautious distance, their faces betraying a dawning realization that their leader had, perhaps, overplayed his hand. Chloe and Sophia exchanged furtive, anxious glances, their earlier self-assuredness replaced by genuine apprehension. Eugene remained a study in stillness, a silent sentinel against the car's shaking wall, his eyes once again closed. The folded wheelchair, still holding Captain Blackwood's waiting books, stood beside him, a mute witness to the unsettling incident. The train, a metal serpent winding through the subterranean arteries of the city, inexorably approached its next stop. Brighton Beach, Eugene's destination. As the train hissed to a slow halt and the doors slid open, Leroy, the conductor, stepped into the car. He was a young man, vibrant and full of an infectious energy, his wide smile and twinkling eyes a familiar sight to regular commuters. Leroy was known for his boundless good nature, his willingness to lend a hand, and his unwavering commitment to his passengers. Today, he carried a small donation box, emblazoned with a local charity's logo, for the monthly collection he organized for the city's homeless population. "Good morning, folks!" Leroy's cheerful voice resonated through the car as he made his way down the aisle, his gaze sweeping over the array of faces. His eyes landed on Eugene, and his smile widened even further. "Oh, Mr. Salloway, already here! I was just wondering if our paths would cross today." He approached the old man, his hand extended in a gesture of friendly greeting. Eugene opened his eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth softening their depths, and returned the handshake. "Good morning, Leroy." Eugene's voice was calm, yet a subtle undercurrent of weariness rippled beneath its surface. "I brought you a little something, but—" He gestured with a slight tilt of his head toward the unfortunate flattened donuts still clinging to the grimy floor. Leroy's brow furrowed in concern, his cheerful demeanor momentarily dimmed by the sight of the ruined pastries. His gaze sharpened, sweeping across the car until it settled on the cluster of teenagers. The guilt etched on their faces, even in their attempts to appear nonchalant, spoke volumes. Leroy, a keen observer of human nature, understood instantly what had transpired. "What happened here?" Leroy's voice, though still controlled, had lost its earlier lightness, replaced by a steely edge of disapproval. He fixed his gaze on Xavier, who immediately averted his eyes, feigning intense interest in a smudge on the floor. Xavier, trying desperately to avoid a direct confrontation, mumbled, "Nothing, conductor. The old man just tripped." Blake and Chance offered hurried, unconvincing nods of agreement, though their flushed faces betrayed their complicity. Chloe and Sophia stared fixedly at their shoes, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Leroy took a step closer to the group, his smile entirely gone, replaced by an expression of grim determination. "I saw what happened, Xavier," Leroy stated, his voice now firm, each word carrying the weight of his authority. "You deliberately stuck out your foot, and you were recording it all on your phone, weren't you?" Xavier's face drained of color. I was just—" he stammered, his words dissolving into a desperate, inarticulate mumble. "You weren't just anything," Leroy cut him off, his voice unwavering. "You humiliated an elderly man, a veteran, a man who gave his entire life to this country. And you did it for some meaningless, idiotic video. I am utterly ashamed of you." Leroy turned to Eugene, his expression softening once more. "Mr. Salloway, I offer you my deepest apologies for the egregious behavior of these young people. This kind of disrespect is absolutely unacceptable in our subway system, or anywhere else for that matter." Eugene merely offered a slight nod. He did not wish for Leroy to escalate the situation further on his behalf, preferring quiet resolution. "I am calling station security immediately," Leroy declared, pulling out his radio. "This kind of conduct will not be tolerated on New York City Transit." At the mention of security, Xavier and his friends visibly panicked. Xavier, his voice suddenly desperate, pleaded, "No, conductor, please, don't call security. We were just joking. We didn't mean any harm." "A joke that humiliates and offends is no joke at all," Leroy retorted, his voice unyielding. "Now, I am asking all of you to exit this car, immediately." The teenagers began to protest, their voices a chorus of indignation. "But we're going to school! We'll be late!" Chloe whined, her voice high-pitched with frustration. "That is entirely your problem," Leroy replied, his voice utterly devoid of sympathy. "You made your choice. Now please, exit the train." Under Leroy's unwavering gaze and stern tone, the teenagers slowly, reluctantly, began to shuffle out of the car. Xavier, casting a final venomous glare at Eugene, was the last to step onto the platform. His face was a mask of sullen resentment, a promise of future mischief lingering in his eyes. Leroy, watching them go, turned back to Eugene, his expression regretful. "Once again, my apologies, Mr. Salloway." "Not all young people are like that, I promise you. And if you'll allow me, I would like to make up for those donuts. I bought some delicious muffins this morning, fresh from the bakery." Eugene's lips curved into a faint smile. "Thank you, Leroy. You are very kind. But it was never about the donuts. It was about respect." "I understand, sir." Leroy nodded, his eyes filled with a genuine understanding. "But please, take these anyway." He extended a small paper bag, filled with 3 still warm, golden brown muffins. Eugene accepted the bag, his fingers brushing Leroy's. "Thank you, Leroy. You are a true gentleman." The train shuddered and began to move, leaving the disgruntled teenagers behind on the platform, their humiliation a visible shroud around them. Leroy continued his rounds, checking fares and greeting passengers, his professional demeanor restored. Eugene closed his eyes once more, but this time, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. He felt a quiet gratitude for Leroy's decisive action. It was a small but significant reminder that decency and a sense of justice still existed in the world. The train continued its journey, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a soothing balm. Eugene slowly unwrapped one of the muffins, savoring its sweet, comforting aroma. Just as he was about to take a bite, the train lurched violently, a sudden jarring stop that sent passengers tumbling forward, grabbing onto seats and poles for support. An amplified, distorted voice crackled over the intercom, the driver's words barely decipherable. "Attention, valued passengers, we have a slight delay. Someone has thrown an object onto the tracks." A collective murmur of annoyance rippled through the car. Passengers began to grumble, their frustration palpable. Eugene opened his eyes, his gaze immediately drawn to the window. In the distance, on the platform of the station the train had just left, he could make out the silhouettes of a group of teenagers. He recognized Xavier, his arm raised in a triumphant, mocking gesture, clearly indicating his culpability. It seemed that Xavier and his friends, in their childish fit of pique, had thrown something onto the tracks as an act of petty revenge, a desperate attempt to disrupt the rhythm of the city and inconvenience those who had witnessed their humiliation. It was a childish act of vandalism, but in the close confines of the subway, it magnified into a significant disruption. Moments later, the intercom crackled again, announcing that the train would be delayed indefinitely, while subway personnel cleared the obstruction. The frustration in the car escalated into outright anger. People, already late for work or other appointments, began to voice their indignation, their complaints echoing off the car's metallic surfaces. "Oh, this is just wonderful!" exclaimed a man in a crisp business suit, his face contorted in exasperation. "Now everyone will be late because of some hooligans." "They should have been arrested on the spot," added an elderly woman, her voice trembling with indignation. Leroy, upon hearing the announcement, reappeared in the car, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of grave concern. He understood the cascade of problems this delay would unleash. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are doing everything in our power to resolve this situation as quickly as possible," Leroy announced, his voice attempting to project calm and reassurance amidst the rising tide of discontent. "We deeply apologize for the inconvenience." but his words offered little comfort. The dissatisfaction in the car only intensified. A tall man with a reddish beard, seated in another part of the car, had been observing the unfolding drama in silence until now. This was Robert Kimball, a meticulously dressed logistics manager for a major transportation company, a man whose very existence revolved around punctuality and efficiency. He abhorred delays. Suddenly, he rose to his feet. "This is absolutely outrageous," Robert boomed, his voice cutting through the rising din. "Those children should be punished to the full extent of the law. And you, conductor, why didn't you call the police immediately?" Leroy attempted to explain, his voice strained. "I was going to, sir, but they fled." "That is no excuse," Robert interrupted, his voice laced with unyielding criticism. "You should have detained them. And now, because of your indecision, we are all stuck here." Leroy, usually unflappable, felt his patience fraying. "I am doing everything I can, sir." "No, you are not," Robert retorted, his voice rising in volume. "You should have called the police when they were humiliating that old man. You saw everything." At this moment, a new voice entered the fray. Helen O'Connor, a young woman in medical scrubs, on her way to a shift at Mount Sinai Hospital, had been seated near Eugene, quietly observing the entire unfolding drama. "If I may interject, sir," Helen said, addressing Robert, her voice calm but firm. Conductor Leroy acted appropriately. He attempted to de-escalate the conflict peacefully. And he did warn those teenagers. Now, they are simply demonstrating their profound lack of upbringing. "And who are you to lecture me?" Robert snapped, his face flushed with indignation. "I am late for a crucial meeting, and I frankly could not care less about the upbringing of those hooligans." The tension in the car reached its zenith. Eugene, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Leroy, then at Robert, and finally at Helen. In his eyes, a new resolve, subtle yet powerful, began to take shape. The train remained stalled between stations, immersed in the oppressive gloom of the tunnel. Only the faint orange glow of the emergency lights pierced the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows. The clamor of the frustrated crowd had subsided, replaced by an uneasy silence. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the next development. What's about to happen? No one saw coming. But it's exactly what will set things right. The subway car hung suspended in the absolute blackness of the tunnel, a captive vessel in the Earth's damp embrace. Only the faint, anemic glow of the emergency lights offered a meager illumination, painting the confined space with an unsettling palette of shadows. The air, heavy with unspoken tension, hummed with a palpable mix of frustration and fear. Passengers murmured amongst themselves, their voices hushed, a few futilely attempting to dial out on their cell phones, only to be met with the dead silence of no signal. Robert Kimball, his face a mask of furious indignation, continued his vehement protests, demanding an immediate resolution to their predicament. Leroy, though outwardly composed, wrestled with an internal storm of anxiety, his efforts to establish contact with the central dispatcher proving fruitless. It was at this precise moment, when the situation seemed utterly bereft of hope, that Eugene, who until then had been an almost invisible presence, slowly rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, imbued with a quiet purpose, as if he were preparing for an act of profound significance. He gently pushed his wheelchair, laden with Captain Blackwood's cherished books, slightly to the side, carving out a small personal space amidst the tightly packed bodies. "Pardon my intrusion." Eugene's voice, though soft, possessed an uncanny resonance that cut through the lingering murmurs, compelling every passenger to turn and listen. "But it seems I may be able to offer some assistance." All eyes, a kaleidoscope of curiosity and suspicion, swiveled towards him. Robert Kimball, his face still flushed with irritation, let out a dismissive snort. "And what precisely can you do, old man? Tell us some tall tales from the grave?" Eugene, with an almost imperceptible shift in his gaze, chose to ignore the cutting remark. He moved with a quiet dignity towards the conductor's cabin door, the portal to the train's operational heart. He knocked, a firm, even rap that echoed subtly in the enclosed space. The train's engineer, a weary-looking older gentleman named Frank Murphy, peered out, his face etched with the accumulated stress of the sudden delay. "What do you want?" Frank's voice was raspy, edged with impatience. "We have an emergency here, and I don't have time for—" "Frank, it's Eugene," the old man stated, his voice calm, yet imbued with an unmistakable weight. The engineer froze. His eyes, initially narrowed with annoyance, widened in disbelief. He stared at Eugene, his expression a mixture of profound shock and dawning recognition. "Eugene?" "It can't be. Is that truly you, Eugene?" "The one and only," Eugene replied, a faint knowing smile playing on his lips, a subtle warmth softening the lines of his aged face. Frank Murphy, whose countenance had been a mask of exhaustion and irritation moments before, underwent a remarkable transformation. His face lit up with an incandescent joy, and he immediately stepped out of the cabin, extending his hand, grasping Eugene's with an almost desperate eagerness. "Eugene, I don't believe my eyes! It's been decades, old friend! Decades!" Frank exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion, trembling with the sheer force of his excitement. "You've aged, old man, but you're still as sturdy as an oak, I see." The passengers in the car were utterly bewildered. A silent symphony of confusion resonated through the confined space. What was happening? Why was the engineer, a man in a position of authority, reacting with such profound reverence to this seemingly ordinary old man? "Frank, we have a minor predicament here," Eugene said, gesturing vaguely towards the tracks. "It seems my young friends decided to play a rather misguided game of guerrilla warfare." Frank's brows furrowed, his face immediately regaining its serious demeanor. "I know. Some debris on the tracks. Dispatch can't even tell what it is. I've been trying to get through to the emergency response team, but—" "Don't worry," Eugene interrupted, a quiet assurance in his tone. He turned to Leroy, the conductor, whose face was a study in stunned disbelief. "Leroy, do you have a radio with access to the general network?" Leroy, still reeling from the unexpected exchange between Eugene and the engineer, nodded, his movements almost mechanical. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." He extended his handheld radio to Eugene, his hand trembling slightly. Eugene took the radio, his fingers moving with an instinctive familiarity to adjust the frequency. Then he raised it to his lips. "Attention, all stations on the D-line, this is Nighthawk." Eugene's voice, amplified by the radio, resonated through the subway car, echoing off the metallic walls of the tunnel, each word imbued with an astonishing power. The call sign, Nighthawk, sliced through the stale air like a bolt of lightning. An immediate, profound silence descended upon the subway car. The passengers, who moments before had been a chorus of indignant voices, froze in mid-sentence, their expressions shifting from irritation to bewildered shock. Robert Kimball, his mouth still agape, about to launch into another tirade, found his words utterly arrested. Helen O'Connor stared at Eugene, her eyes wide with a dawning realization. Leroy, recognizing the legendary call sign from whispered tales of old, felt a sudden chill ripple down his spine, his face paling visibly. The call sign Nighthawk was not a mere random sequence of words. It was a legendary designation, known only to a select, hallowed few within the Brooklyn Transit Authority, a moniker that belonged to one of the most revered and celebrated engineers in the storied history of the New York City subway system, Eugene Salloway himself. He was the hero who had, against all odds, saved hundreds of lives during the devastating 1978 train derailment on the F line, a catastrophic event caused by a catastrophic brake failure. In that inferno of twisted metal and screaming passengers, Eugene, with unparalleled courage, had remained in the blazing locomotive, manually manipulating the controls, preventing an even more horrific loss of life. For his selflessness, he had received the city's highest civilian honor, becoming a living legend in the annals of New York. However, the ordeal had left him with severe